the NBA has built itself on stars and individuals. That's how they market themselves. Teams, to an extent, in terms of like the jersey and the name, yeah, there's some teams that still have brand name recognition, but there's no rivalries in the NBA. Like, none that I notice.
Among teams.
I'm trying
to help you out here because there's beef among players.
Well, yeah, I mean, players beefing, okay, whatever. That's fine. It just feels soap opera-ish to me.
But even, we were talking in the segment before, we say, okay, if it would have been Lakers, Celtics, the current editions of both of those teams, it's not like they have real history like they would say, when we say Celtics and Lakers, that you would back in the 80s, Magic and Larry.
Yeah, there's no that long-term stability is not there. So the reason why I bring this up, and this is something that's been actually rattling around in my head for a while, and I remember actually I was at Capital BST talking with the owners, Mike and Eddie, over there the other day, and I was getting some shoes about this, and we got a press release yesterday from the University of North Carolina about their upcoming recruiting class, the guys that have signed in. Elliot Cadeau reclassifying the 4 transfers that are coming in. So 7 new guys coming into Carolina this upcoming season. And I got into my head about, well, college athletes, for a long time you would hear, and to an extent you still hear this, about I wanted to go to Carolina because I wanted to compete in Duke, Carolina, or I wanted to compete against NC State. I wanted to be in the ACC because the rivalries and the history, and I wanted to be part of that. That's the reason why you hear people of going to State, Carolina, Duke, even Wake Forest for a long time because of that. They were lumped in all of that. Now with transfer portal and the ability for players to move, which I'm 100% on board with, by the way, I wonder now if athletes, when they're choosing schools, when they're making these decisions on where they go, do rivalries actually factor into their do they take that into consideration when they make their decisions? Does that factor into that? I don't know how much it does, because now we see a player after a year going to another school. So obviously they want to go to a better situation, but I'm wondering how much that factors in. To fans, yes, but to players, does that even matter anymore? I don't know if it does.
And if you're asking the question, Dennis, I think we know the answer to that. I don't even think this is on the landscape in the current context of college sports as we know it now. If you're asking the question, you kind of already know the answer.
I do. I mean, I don't want to put a blanket statement over it, because I'm sure it does factor into a lot of these young players' decisions, because some of them might have been brought up. Like, for example, like Dontrez Styles, who initially was at Carolina, went to Carolina, is from Kinston. Like, I can understand, like, okay, growing up being a Carolina fan, like, so just things along those lines. Yeah, I know he was heavily recruited by State, but does that stuff factor anymore? Fans get invested. Fans are 100%. Heck, I saw Corey Smith from Pack Pride and Keeping It Heels on Twitter going back and forth about championships this season and like all this kind of stuff between Carolina and State. Fans are still into it, but fans also invest into players. But are fans not willing to invest into players knowing that they might leave after a year?
But if you're a player, how do you choose the school? I think this is where this conversation goes to of what I would look at would be, okay, what does your position group look like of the players that are currently on the roster or players that are coming in, and then stability from the coaching staff. Is the head coach going to be there if I'm going to be there in football, say, for 3 or 4 years? What about my position coach as well? To where if there's not stability in either of those things, I'm going to go to the next school that provides that for me. And I'm talking from the player standpoint.
Yeah, from the player standpoint, okay, I get that. You want to set yourself up to have the best future for yourself. I'm 100% on board with that. But do players, when they go to State, Carolina, Duke, Wake, do they even think about the history and the rivalries that were built? Do they actually have someone, for example, if you were at Carolina when Tyler Hansbrough was there, if you were a freshman, I can't remember who was a freshman on the roster, but you saw how Duke and State fans hated Tyler Hansbrough, right? Hated him. Oh, okay, I get this now. Like, I get where this rivalry, like, you actually can tangibly feel that when you're in those buildings. who actually gets that now, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you mentioned Tyler Hansbrough. We were talking before the show, too. The guy I immediately thought of was J.J. Redick at Duke. Where
prime example.
Yeah, so I hear what you're saying, but we don't have, the one and done, you get that, but then the transfer portal adds another wrinkle to that because, okay, if I'm not getting the playing time, if I'm not getting the opportunity that I'm seeking as a player, I can up and leave.
I'm not saying it's completely. Yeah, I agree. I'm not saying it's completely gone because if you looked at, for example, there was some smack talk in the media and stuff. I felt between NC State and Carolina and this stuff this past season because we saw NC State players throwing on sunglasses and shades in the locker room and thing that they were doing. Well, when UNC beat NC State, we saw Armando Bacot throwing the shades on, like kind of poking fun, which I thought was awesome. We saw Drake May even say, well, if you can't get into Carolina, you go to NC State. Like those kinds of
backtracking.
Things. And backtracking. Yeah. Well, here's the thing. But he has that family history.
Yeah.
So there's the thing. There's a family history there with his brother Luke going there. His dad played football at Carolina. There's a family history there. But even here, Terquavion Smith, I think Mayor Clucker's Terquavion Smith saying, hey, yeah, we're the best team in the state of North Carolina. That's what we feel. And so I don't think that it's completely gone. But I'm wondering if it's going to slowly start to dissipate and go away amongst, again, the players. The fans, that ain't changing. I don't think it changes for the fans. But one thing that we will say, fans get invested into players, right? But if players are constantly leaving and moving on, how can I as a fan invest into a player?
And we mentioned Hansbrough. We mentioned Redick. We're talking about players that had been at their respective school for years, Dennis.
Yeah, for years. Multiple years.
It accumulated over time. It wasn't just overnight to where it's just like, oh, this player had one good game against, they smoked my alma mater, or they smoked the team that I happen to root for. It was years and years and years of performances where it's like, man, we gotta go up against this guy again.
Yeah, you learn to hate somebody. That's the thing. As a fan base, sometimes you also learn to hate somebody, not just because of the uniform they wore, but just like, gosh, that guy's still here. Like, if you're an NC State fan, if you're an NC State fan, like, why is Luke May still on the floor? It's that kind of thing. So that kind of stuff. It got me thinking in terms of how we see the NBA, where it is now, and I'm curious to see if in college football, if we start to see that again amongst the players. This is something you got to look at in like 15, 20 years. Does that start to dissipate a little bit? You also looking to leave a final note here on this. If a player that had success at one location transfers and has success at another, where's their allegiance lie?
Brady Manick is a perfect example of this. Oklahoma, North Carolina, and he's only with the Tar Heels, for a season?
For one season. Go to a national championship game, played a massive part in it, beloved by Carolina fans, right? You hear a lot this past season about, man, Oklahoma, if we have Brady Manick. If only Brady Manick were here, how things could have been different. Well, Oklahoma had him for 4 years. Mm-hmm. So where does his allegiance go? Like when if he has success and he wants to donate back to a program, who's he cutting the check to? Oklahoma or Carolina?
If he's listening, we'll have Brady Manick call into this program now.